There are no observers in reality, only participants. And this speaks to the fractal nature of patterns. When I look at what's happening in governance in Washington and examine it through a fractal lens, then we should expect some of the patterns that are played out on a very large scale to be found in a very small scale in our community, and in an even smaller scale in the dynamic of the inner psyche. After all, politicians don't just grow in trees. They were raised by the same parents who raised us. They learned the same things that we are learning. We are part of their world, and they are part of our world. So if we look at patterns of power, patterns of leadership, it's not hard to see, and it's the gift of patterns being blown up and magnified on such a gigantic scale it's almost impossible to avoid noticing the anomalies, the discord, the dysfunction, the dis-ease in the pattern. So one of the patterns we can see is that the higher you are on the power pyramid, the less you are accountable for the structures and laws imposed by the power pyramid. So on a small level, we would expect to see something like my mother saying, no sweets until after dinner, only to discover her in the kitchen secretly eating sweets. And the response upon being discovered is equally informative. Don't tell your brothers and sisters, you can have a cookie too. In other words, you've caught me breaking the rule. Don't turn me in, and I'll let you share in the spoils of breaking the law. Now, I don't think my mother is a particularly horrible or particularly special version of our cult. So I don't expect that her behavior is somehow unique. Where did she get this habit? Where do all the other parents get this habit? And having learned that this is the best way to get a cookie before dinner, why would it somehow change when one of the tightest bonds of both Democrat and Republicans in Washington is the looking the other way, as all of them enrich their family by skirting the rules, enrich their own pockets by violating the guidelines they outline to others. It should be no surprise that Gavin Newsom is caught and photographed eating out in a restaurant without wearing a mask, in close proximity to colleagues and friends, having told the public to shut down their businesses, to stay home, to wear a mask and participate in social distancing. This pattern, institutionalized in the law, the only person you cannot take to court in the United States by law is the president. And the only parent or the only family member in a family you cannot hold accountable is mom and dad. A few slaps, sent to your room, don't sass back. The issue is over. We'll continue breaking the rules as it suits us. We'll continue spouting the rules that we'd like you to do that are good for us. And so it goes. So really, the gift of watching national news in the United States is a close-up view of the destructive consequences when mom and dad in power structures in Washington behave exactly like the high facilitators or our parents at home. So why would the high facilitators, having caught each other breaking the rules to have affairs, to fall in love with a participant throughout, over time, throughout the years, why would they somehow hold themselves accountable to the guidelines that are necessary to protect the participant more than our parents did, more than Trump or the Democrats? The Democratic press, very discreetly, if you look at the pattern, ignored the very credible sexual abuse allegations of Tara Reade, an intern in the younger Biden administration, who has had her life devastated by the fallout of first being molested by her boss, then shamed and censored for reporting it, then blacklisted from her career path, and she happened to be an avid Democrat and wanting to support the verbal dialogue, the verbal representation of what Joe was about. Why such muted coverage about the treatment of women, which is a supposed democratic strong point? Now, we should expect that there would be this pattern of the rules don't apply to us because we're at the top. So why would Trump wear a mask or be bound to science? Why would he put the people first when he could play golf and get away with it? And this brings in the awareness of the circle. Because for every one of these fractal patterns to exist, it takes 3 participating players. There are no witnesses. There are only participants. It takes an abuser in a masculine role. It doesn't matter if it's male or female, in the initiatory role, to create an asymmetrical relationship with the recipient, who, whether male or female, is in a feminine role. The assertive one is in the masculine position. The receptive one is in the feminine position. So for an abuse to take place, an absence of good use, an imbalanced and unsustainable and exploitive relationship, you need someone occupying a masculine position to assert intimidate, dominate. So it's usually someone with high rank, the parent, the teacher, the bigger male, because let's face it, rapes would go down if women had stronger, more muscular bodies than men, carried more guns, and knew karate. Rape occurs because someone is in a dominant position through physical size, through social rank, through legal status, and someone is in a receptive position, often institutionalized by the role. There are feminine and masculine roles. Doesn't matter about gender. The teacher is in a masculine role. You will learn what I have to say in the way that I have to say it. The student's in a feminine role. I guess we have to learn what they say and the way that they say it, or we get failed. Because most of our power structures are self-referential. I remember trying to ascertain the reason for the subjects in school, because I had decided to drop out of high school for good at age 14 and study topics that seemed more relevant to life skills and well-being. But being only 14 years old and wanting to include the authority figures around me, I asked my parents, I asked each of my teachers at my Waldorf school, what do you think about me dropping out? Oh, it was a terrible idea. Why is it a terrible idea? Well, you won't get your high school diploma. Why do I need a high school diploma? Because if you don't have that, you can't get a job. Why is it that someone won't hire me to do something I'm good at if I don't have a bit of paper saying I'm good at it? In fact, since I'm not going to get a job doing algebra or reciting the history of bridges in the 1850s or the list of presidents, since what I'm learning at school at this age, having already mastered writing, reading, and arithmetic, what I'm learning at this age does not seem to have anything to do with any job that I'd like to get. So why would an intelligent employer say, you don't know the history of bridges, I'm not going to hire you to build a house or to design a beautiful garden or to grow food? This useful skills have nothing to do with 90% of what goes on in high school. And these are key formative years when, if one does not learn entrepreneurship, if one does not learn sales, if one does not learn yoga, if one does not learn to think, if one does not learn the habit of writing a diary, if one does not study dreams, if one does not learn time management and goal accomplishment through self-initiative, there will be no person as an entrepreneur imposing a schedule. And if you don't learn the art of a routine, you're done for. Why are these skills being neglected? Now, thankfully, I left school because I reasoned that none of the grown-ups I consulted had thought through the equation as thoughtfully as I did. And I figured that even though they were all lined up against me to a one, every teacher and every parent were unanimous, I figured that one person thinking things through carefully and coming up with an accurate equation was more relevant than dozens of people who didn't bother to think the equation through. And as a result of that choice, I was able to successfully start my landscape design and installation business at age 17 and grow it continually into the win-win relationship it is with clients today, 27 years later, creating more and more free time every year, more and more net income every year, more and more value for clients every year. And no one has ever asked to see my GED. They want to see the work I did for the last customer. They want to know if it was done on time, and 90% of my jobs are done early. They're all done on budget. I communicate thoroughly every single day to all needs and questions of clients, and that's what service looks like. And I didn't learn those skills at school. I learned them going for walks and listening to Brian Tracy's advanced selling strategies at age 16, and using that as the basis to make a value proposition to my clients, leading to full-time work within 2 weeks of effort at less than $40 in startup costs. Well, this points to a very important point on the bell curve of intelligence and the bell curve of innovation. And the mathematical reality is that less than 1% of any population is more intelligent being measured by the efficiency with which energy is transformed into sustainable human well-being, than the other 99%. It has to be that way, because all innovation begins with a distinct minority, and having proved itself, widens to the early adopters, and having proved itself to them, ripples out until it's the new majority, by which time a new innovation has always taken place. And the most intelligent technology, be that a thought, a meme, a gadget, is again in the hands of 1%. Now, if you understand that the dynamics of a group, you understand that the majority in most sociopathic cultures have a hostile relationship with their minorities. It doesn't matter if it's blacks being treated hostilely by whites, or Native Americans being butchered by invaders, or white men in power treating women less favorably than themselves as a power majority. For example, the Western cult has been founded on multiple religions, not one of which has a female deity at the pinnacle. Doesn't matter if you're Buddhist or Muslim or interested in any Indian sect. The top deity, the top archetype, is masculine. Well, that's an asymmetrical system. And like any wheel that turned gracefully when it was balanced, as it becomes more and more watermelon-shaped, it becomes more and more violent the faster you drive that vehicle. Driving 4 watermelons at 60 miles an hour, you're lucky if you don't go unconscious with the amount of vibration and volatility that such asymmetry introduces into the system. It takes an initiator in a masculine role and someone often with lower rank in a feminine role. That's the problem with chauvinism, right? You see, the cult is self-referential. If you're in the teacher role, you're automatically better than the student because the student is in a feminine role. And if the deity structure of the cult is that the top deity is masculine, then anyone, by definition, occupying a feminine role has lower rank within the cult paradigm. And so the masculine, the top, the norm, is always right. If the teacher is incompetent and the student points it out in front of the class, as I did in school, the teacher has a fit and rages with the authority of their role at the student. And if you can get the teacher body, the parent body, the principals to all line up and gang up on the student, it doesn't matter if the student is correct. The law of mass that says that the bigger object cascades and dominates the smaller object in a sociopathic paradigm dictates the outcome. I just became the class clown because although I didn't learn anything and no more intelligent questions got asked, this satisfied the teacher because the clown was not a threat the way incisive lines of reason immediately reveal the inadequacy of poorly thought out equations, be they social equations, be they hierarchical equations. They fall apart, as all dysfunctional cults fall apart under the examination of mathematics. Mathematics likes symmetry. Any car builder that is distorted by chauvinism and sends out skewed wheels will lose market share to a manufacturer that is willing to bow to the laws of symmetry, to the laws of intelligence. It's why Tesla is more valuable today as a result of investors like myself recognizing the power of first principle thinking. And, when I saw that Tesla was the #1 shorted stock on the stock exchange, meaning that more of the big boys were betting against Tesla and trying to grind it into the ground. Well, I know what that's all about. And the minority is usually right. Not always, because you have another minority on the other side of the bell curve that is incredibly incompetent and too stupid to know that they're stupid. But if you're looking for exceptional, you already know you're looking for something that only 1% of people are doing or believing or thinking. Because everything that is exceptional relative to the status quo is in that category. So you already know that if a majority of people are saying this, doing this, feeling this, thinking this, believing this, you already know that that is mediocre relative to what 1% of the group is doing, 1% of the population, 1% of the planet. By definition, it's just how the mathematics of the bell curve works. It's how it's always worked. A new technology comes along, everyone says it can't be done, then they say it shouldn't be done, then they say it's of no value, then they say, what's going on here, this will fade out, and then it becomes the new norm. So I put all my money in Tesla because it is cruel to evolution when the more ignorant majority crushes out the value, the intelligence, the beauty of the distinct minority. This is why I say that if you want to know and see a cult that loves itself, look at how well they treat their minorities, because every one of their evolutions will be born not from the majority, but out of the minority. Now, if you know that every one of your greatest new innovations are going to come from a very, very tiny group of people, then if you want a living culture, you take great care of your minorities. You welcome diversity and you grow it so that there are more healthy minority members able to innovate. And they, not the other 90%, will lead the cult forward. In the 70s or so, that was the tech sector in Silicon Valley. That was taboo. Those guys were all crazy idiots, weren't going to do anything, it was all nonsense. And yet they defined what a majority of people are doing with the majority of their time today online, which means that by this point, there is a new distinct minority that has developed something else that 10, 20, 30 years from now. And this iteration process happens faster and faster. So I just put all my money into a minority thinker who seemed to be on the 1% of the most intelligent and innovative, rather than on the 1% of the most idiotic, but was definitely doing things that no other car maker in the world was doing. Now, I did that for emotional reasons. I don't enjoy beauty being crushed by an ignorant majority. It bothers me to see how self-destructive so many of the players in our cult are, using mass and bullying dynamics. If you read the biographies of Microsoft or Oracle, it is a long history of murdering innovation to maintain a mediocrity based on sheer mass. Microsoft was known as the 800-pound gorilla. And they would destroy you through bullying your clients in any way possible, through bullying you or buying you out, and often killing off superior technology to maintain their mass. It's how you create a dogmatic cult of mediocrity, whether it's in technology, whether it's in religion. You look at the hostility towards change in something like the Catholic Church. They're killing themselves by murdering socially, financially, and at times physically the people in their midst that lead to innovation. So there's someone on the feminine side that lacks rank, that doesn't have the standing to stop the unsustainable dynamic. And then there's the majority that are the bystanders. There is the group that witnesses and either supports the circle in coming back into symmetry or allows the circle to collapse into a dysfunctional state through fear, apathy, or a variety of beliefs that don't work. The very belief that you are an observer that has no impact is a belief in a chauvinistic cult that guarantees the collapse of the circle. And we are in a cult that specializes in the collapsing of circles, the collapse of the family, the collapse of the marriage, the collapse of the employee-boss relationship, the collapse of collaboration between citizen and government, the collapse of partnering. You know, both the Democratic and Republican Party together make up a pretty good system. I mean, if you just look at the basic things, traditions have some value. Low bureaucracy has some value. Being able to pay your bills and not running up endless debt has value. Some spiritual meaning in life has value. Freedom has value. Diversity has value. Women have value. Free speech has value. Change has value. Every one of these things in appropriate recipes leads to more well-being than one versus the other. The past continuously crushing the future is worse than them negotiating to have some new things and some traditional things. Some rapid change and some slower change. These correlate to the brain. They correlate to the psyche. We experience trauma if everything changes all the time in all areas. We experience boredom if nothing changes in all areas all the time. In any polarity, the fruit is in the middle. And they create a synergy if they know how to relate. But they don't. This isn't random. This isn't unsuspecting. Chauvinism is predicated on the idea that one half of the psyche, that one half of the world, that one half of all the thoughts are better by definition than everything else. The power always lies in the majority of the group. The intelligence always lies disproportionately in the minority of the group. We're not talking about value as a human being. We're just acknowledging the mathematical reality that when any new idea, technology, ritual, habit is created for the first time, it was created by either one person or a couple of people and spreads from there. Some of those new things are superior to the status quo. Thank goodness, because that's how evolution occurs. And the health of the circle is determined by how that minority is treated. Now, why do we have only one Elon Musk out of 300 million Americans? Well, it's not hard. He went to start SpaceX, and every single one of his friends recommended against it. It didn't conform with the status quo. He had just started PayPal, had made $400 million, and what rich people are supposed to do in our cult is have young girlfriends, buy islands, be in all the magazines, and basically consume vast amounts of resources, proving how luxuriously they can live with how many houses. Elon at the moment is homeless. He got rid of his houses. And they said there's a good chance of failure, which there was, which he acknowledged. Well, when he went to start an electric car company, everyone said that was a terrible idea. If you've been following the narrative over the last 10 years, it's one big automaker, Bob Lutzoff, coming on and talking about how it's all going to go bankrupt. It's a terrible idea. And then you have the biggest short in the entire stock market trying to sabotage one guy who isn't trying to make a lot of money. In his teen years, he also diverged from the norm. And he asked himself, what were the big problems this earth was facing? Is climate change? Things like asteroids. He studied physics and realized that we have no early warning system. If another dinosaur-type asteroid shows up next week, we've got nothing in place to do anything about it, to give us warning, to stop it. And wouldn't it be a shame if all that evolution just went up in smoke because we had nothing off planet? No computers, no language, nothing stored off planet. So, how to make us a multi-planetary species? Well, he figured out that to start out, you'd form a rocket company that was 10 times more efficient and 10 times cheaper than NASA or any other rocket company on the planet. And there you have the self-landing rockets. So he's described starting these three companies, Solar City, Tesla, SpaceX, as the experience of eating glass and staring out into the abyss. He doesn't recommend it for anyone who wants an enjoyable life, because our cult put him through absolute torture to do more for our planet environmentally and technologically than almost all the other environmental organizations combined. It's a big thing to switch to solar and electricity for a planet. And Tesla has accelerated that process by decades. Now everyone's on board. And Elon is delighted and has open-sourced his patents so that other automakers can copy and catch up to Tesla, and that the world will be electric faster. Well, it just so happens that if you can overcome the killing spree of the bullying majority, if they can't, with all the combined weight of billions of dollars, do you know what it feels like to be an individual trying to do something fragile, new, and different? and have $24 billion invested by older men in the power structure, all gunning for you to fail. Well, that's why you have one Elon who made it through that wall of fire. The real question to ask is, do we want to live in a cult where we tyrannize that degree of innovation, either out of sheer hostility and self-hatred, or envy that we don't want to see something innovating beyond ourselves, or the laziness of stupidity, because it is far more easy not to think, not to learn, not to face the unknown and deal with our own demons, our own crises that lie in the unregulated part of the psyche, than it is to pioneer new change in the face of a fearful majority. So we have one Elon, we had one Steve Jobs. We could have thousands, but it would take a different relationship to critical thinking, a different relationship to first principles, and it would take breaking the taboo, the cult taboos that say that's none of my business. You see, Elon's made it his business to leave this planet in a better place. He's saying, it is my business, and there's nothing I'd rather do, regardless of the amount of money I have, than work 100-hour weeks doing this and pioneering new spaces. It is my planet. It's my business. It's my world. It's my legacy. And I'm going to contribute what I can. I think it's one of the reasons that the naysayers could not bully him into destruction. Because ultimately, he's doing it for the future. And that's a much stronger drive than just trying to make money. The majority holds the power. If everyone, including me, had ganged up on Elon, he would be broke. Another brilliant, innovative person would be crushed by the system. Well, when I saw this happening, I put every penny I owned into Tesla stock, liked the videos, criticized those trying to attack him, sent money to those trying to support him. And there were enough of people like me that they made it through the crisis. And now all of us will have a safer form of transportation, a cleaner form of transportation, faster, with more excellence. And that's what it takes for a system to innovate. So most of you watching this video are going to default to cult norms. This has nothing to do with me. That's what the facilitator said. When I asked for help after developing symptoms of PTSD due to the sustained incompetence and cruelty of Peter Sandhill, they said it's not our thing. No. That's you and Peter. This is not a high issue. And so it's not surprising, that being the position in leadership, that was also the position of the team. It's not our issue. And thus, that was also the position of the community. But the power lies in the majority. The intelligence lies in the minority, on the bell curve, the most intelligence. Doesn't matter what the field is, chess, organic agriculture, electric cars, physics, mathematics. The intelligence lies in a minority. The majority cannot be better than a distinct minority. It's not the way nature works. So, in abnegating the responsibility to respond, the ability and willingness to respond, the circle collapses into a watermelon shape of highly inefficient abuse, where it's imposed. It's very difficult for a regressed client in a therapeutic relationship, particularly under the influence of psychedelics, to exert more influence than a determined authority figure backed by the gatekeepers to one's community. The law of mass is such that when you're a small one surrounded by big ones, the body has a traumatic sense of death associated with conflict with the majority. Because truly so. The majority decides you're a witch and wants to burn you. It doesn't matter that they're wrong. A crowd of uneducated hooligans, whether it's the Catholic Church in relationship to Galileo, or an angry mob that doesn't want to embrace some other form of science. It's very easy to destroy that small minority. The Chinese did it very well under Mao. They burned books, tortured and murdered their most educated people, and descended their cult into a state of horror, poverty, and mediocrity for decades, until they decided to celebrate and reward their most talented people again. So what are some of the unsustainable or weak positions of the majority? So who are the majority? So there's Dane, there's Peter Sandhill, Sarah Sandhill, the other facilitators at High, the board of directors. And then there are all of the participants. There are all of the team members. So they are the majority. And the minority cannot function without the majority, at least within a system. If the boss gets too out of line and all of the employees go on strike, the company often grinds to a halt. The system always depends on the cooperation of the majority. And the ideas propagated by the cult are, it's none of my business. I have nothing to do with this. I'm just an observer. But in fact, all of the abuses of our cult rely on a passive, fearful, and apathetic majority, because they could not occur without the full participation, be it turning away or intervening, to restore the symmetry of the circle, which is the only shape that leads to sustainable grace, trust, reduction in tension and violence. A dysfunctional, abusive relationship by a wealthy man to a poor, scared, and smaller woman can go on for years, but not forever. One day, she's going to take a gun to his head. One day, she's going to run out in the night and not come back, because the relationship is asymmetrical. One person is taking and then using what is taken to harm. You know, we have revolutions when the kings extract money from the peasants in order to build palaces and armies to further oppress the peasants. We're going to steal from you so that we can use what we've stolen from you to harm you. Well, the power always lies in the majority. That swings too far, you get an overthrow of the system, you get healthy evolution. Now, very healthy evolution means you don't distort the circle to begin with, which means everyone owns their part on the circle. I'm not going to stay silent. I'm not going to lie to protect an asymmetrical system. Because the protocols that destroy the symmetry and sustainability of the system are the cancers within the system. They're not ultimately about the people involved. If there's cancer in a system, be it your own body, your friend's body, your country, if there's cancer in the system, it is damaging to you, your friend, the country, and the system. The cancer is the enemy. So why do some people fight to defend the cancer that's killing them and everything they claim to value? Part of it is the crisis of identity. The more traumatized a group of people is, the more they hang on to the status quo. The status quo is their habits of thinking, feeling, speaking, and doing. If the cancer grows in and becomes part of the identity, you know, Trump is outraged at the idea that the electoral college couldn't be bought and bullied, fuming because the cancer is so deep in that perception that it's become part of the identity. When you identify and say, that's me, the one who thinks this way, feels this way, talks this way, and acts this way, and no one's going to challenge my identity, no one's going to make me change. Well, the truth is there's always a better way of doing things. There's always a better way of thinking. There's always a better way of feeling. There's always a better way of speaking. So if you're resistant to change just based on the idea that someone wants you to change, you have an inferior processing, digestion ability of force than if you are differentiating, is the change leading to higher efficiencies of converting energy into sustainable well-being, or is the change leading to greater suffering and cruelty, i.e. by increasing the inefficiency with which energy is transformed into sustainable well-being? If you cannot think, and thinking is very unpopular in a self-referential cult, because the only way that the cult can maintain a status quo that is at odds with science, that is consuming more energy per capita than any cult in human history, while creating high levels of misery. 77% of Americans are lonely. 1 in 4 will get cancer. 1 in 4 will participate in being sexually abused. 90% of the population is shame-based. These are all suffering. If a majority of your people is in such pain that more people commit suicide than die in traffic accidents every year, by a noticeable percent, but you're consuming more energy than any cult in human history to maintain that position, it's a weak argument for the status quo. But if you're traumatized and trauma illiterate, you're terrified of change in the unknown. Terrified of change in the unknown, anyone who upsets the cart by sharing inconvenient information. It's an inconvenient bit of information if you're dedicated to get Trump out of office that Biden also sexually abused women, one of the things you happen to be running on, one of the things you care about. He just probably didn't do it as much as Trump, based on all the data, but he still did it, and that woman has had 30 years of her life inevitably and unchangeably altered for the worse, so that someone in power could disown responsibility for his emotional incompetence, for his relational illiteracy, for his chauvinism. He hasn't made it right for Tara Reade. It's an inconvenient truth when he probably hasn't abused as many people as Trump. So what do you do with those truths? Do you cut them down? Do you talk about them? Most importantly, do you advocate for the victim? Biden's probably spent over $1 million doing damage control around Tara Reade. She hasn't received $100,000 in support for the vast impact on her life by being sexually abused by someone in our power structure. The Human Awareness Institute, over time, if they continue on this route, will spend $1 million in lost profits, in bizarre mental gymnastics, to avoid dealing with the fact that not only is a facilitator sexually abusing a high participant a high issue, counter to letter from then chairman of the board of High, but it is the most important issue. There is nothing more important to High's mission than first do no harm. First, stop the sexual abuse of your leadership team, then focus on educating and benefiting the rest of the community. It's not the other way around. First, we'll teach the community how to love, and then we'll stop molesting our own participants as leadership. That doesn't work as an equation. So, what are the unsustainable positions as the majority? Because the position is that I've written to over 500 High participants, and every single one of them avoided asking how they could help. To my knowledge, none of them have protested the fact that their community is being destroyed by a cancer that infects the facilitator body and affects everyone. It infects the facilitator body, but you could also say it infects the entire community. Because if you're a high participant, you have to deal with this very odd equation. What you have to say is, I care about love. I care about healthy relationships. I care about a world where everyone wins. I care about sustainable relationships. I care so much that I'm going to pick weekends of my life, afternoons of my life, to go learn these skills. And I care so much to spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars to realize those goals. And yet, the position I maintain in apathetic, judgmental, fearful disinterest is the position of a sociopath. Because surely a sociopath relates to other people's pain as being not about them. Why would a sociopath stop hurting their child just because the child is screaming? It releases energy, lots of stress builds up in the daily life. Beating the shit out of your child releases some of that stress. Maybe looking them in the eye and seeing the terror and fear in their eye. Satisfying. Gives a sense of power. The reptilian brain is not interested in empathy or science. It's interested in expedient dominance if you have the power, or running if you don't. It's fight what's smaller than you, run from what's bigger than you, freeze if neither of those strategies work. To behave like a sociopath while one's community symmetry collapses into abusive dynamics is the behavior of a reptile. But I'm trying to learn how to love, which is the behavior of an empath. You see, and the law of empathy is that you care for the person in the most pain. The law of empathy is that you care for the person in the most pain. The law of the reptile is that you attack those who are most vulnerable. So you have the law of empathy, you have the law of the sociopath. They both work, but they don't both produce love and trust. It is unsustainable to hold a position. I'm not interested in the fact that a high participant, in fact, multiple high participants, have been sexually abused by a high facilitator. I'm not interested in helping those most in pain. Now, ultimately, the abuser and the victim are in the same amount of pain. The abuser is discharging an unconscious pain or a conscious pain with the abuse, and the victim is receiving it. In a chauvinistic cult where you have a high-ranking abuser and a lower-ranking recipient, the pain is experienced most during the wound in the sexual abuse survivor. So in an empathic frame of reference, the entire community supports and restores the symmetry by championing the survivor of the abuse, and next turns their attention to the abuser. First, you restore the symmetry for the survivor. Then you turn attention to the abuser. Now, if you're in reptilian framework, it is for revenge. If you're in an empathic framework, you understand the mathematics, which says that the abusers are damaging themselves with the disease of their protocols, the disease of their beliefs, because a healthy person does not traumatize another human being. Now, if someone is not healthy, they're living with that 24/7. But of course, the reality is the vast majority are not healthy either. And this is why there is complete collusion. The victim accepts the abuse and goes away with a message of worthlessness. The abuser accepts the abuse and says that's just normal. And the entire community stands passively by and says it's not my problem. And that will replicate as a virus rippling out. Now, in the Hunger Games, or some frame of sociopathic reference, this is how evolution occurs among reptiles. This is how crocodiles evolved. The biggest crocodile in the battles would grow on. There was no feeling. But it is essential to understand that love is impossible from the reptilian brain. And so if love or trust or sustainable relationships or empathy or growth or evolution is anywhere on your radar, your number one intelligent response is to support the most vulnerable and the most in pain members of the circle. In doing so, there is a challenge to the asymmetrical distribution of power and the most sociopathic protocols of leadership. Only then does the symmetry restore. Now, what's the power and beauty of symmetry and sustainability? It means you get healthy returns in evolution every year once that circle is restored. What's the price of violation, trauma, and all of the reptilian protocols? You destroy all trust. You depress more and more individuals into the reptilian fight, flight, freeze mechanism. All love is numb and inaccessible. All people are feared. And you have a complete hypocrisy of the stated goal. So for every high participant, team member, public bystander that walks away from these issues, you have an affirmation at a cult level that we are in a reptilian cult that's called love. It may just be sexual addiction. It's called love. But we don't actually understand the meaning or definition of love. We don't understand the way when we get to a position of power, will destroy and dominate vulnerable minorities with the same cruelty and brutality as the Spanish, as Abu Ghraib, as the Nazis. You see, the Jews were a minority. They made people uncomfortable with their difference. And the majority can always dominate a minority if it's operating from the reptilian brain. Now, Jason Weston has said that trauma is not a high issue. Now, for anyone who understands psychology and has read The Body Keeps the Score or other books, you understand the profound ignorance of that statement. Because Jason Weston at the time was chairman of the board of a mission statement to create a world where everyone wins. And everyone loses when the virus of trauma spreads. And the best way to predict, the best way to spread trauma is to traumatize one person and then do nothing to contain and heal the trauma. If you want to spread dissent, insanity, sociopathic behavior in your family and your group, all you have to do is traumatize one of your children and then leave them trapped in the reptilian brain. And their sociopathic behavior, because someone trapped in the reptilian brain becomes sociopathic. That's the point. You see, the reptilian brain is a foundation. It got us to mammals. And it was useful. It has no feelings, no empathy, no love, no trust. It's a calculation algorithm of dominance. The alligator would rather attack the 5-year-old little boy who's following their parents as they walk along the river than the parents. Because the alligator has more chance of survival than if he attacks a bigger mammal. And so the alligator goes for the 5-year-old. The human being protects the 5-year-old and challenges the parent. The difference is the reptilian or the empathic brain. Sometimes you have a should brain of you're numb, you're in trauma, like many of us, but you have an overlay of rational ethics. You do it because you think it's the right thing to do, even though you feel nothing, because you're too traumatized. The single biggest impediment in all of our communities to violation, betrayal, abuse, PTSD, trauma, and repetitive sociopathic and addictive behavior is trauma illiteracy and the incompetence of protocols to adequately respond to trauma. And so if you're standing there looking at this dynamic and saying it has nothing to do with me, or you're standing at the dynamic and feeling frightened, you don't want to confront the bigger one of the facilitator body. There was one team member who showed up and was in my camp for a couple of months, very, very valuably. And she did so on condition that I never reveal her identity. That's how scared she was of being punished by her teachers about love. She cleaned up maybe 10% of their mess. So the high facilitator sexually abused a high participant, then coerced silence, then dominated and intimidated, then withdrew his social support, and then denied that that was a high issue. That's a typical Washington trick. You could pretty much count on any facilitator using that protocol to do well in American politics. It's not about protecting the people. It's about enriching yourself, lying, and trying not to get caught and making alliances with other people in a sociopathic paradigm. This one assistant cleaned up 10% of their mess by providing support at a vital time. And she knew her leadership body well enough to understand that she would be punished, that she might not do well for doing the right thing. That's when you're in a totalitarian regime. If you're afraid of confronting your leadership body, your teachers about love, it should alert you to the fact that you're not dealing with love. You're dealing with the reptilian brain. And the reptilian brain comes online in direct proportion to the sociopathic elements in the environment. The more trauma, the more shame, the more brutality, the more hypocrisy, the more insanity, and the more cruelty is demonstrated by the leadership bodies in the power circles in which we reside. The more aggravated and stimulated the reptilian brain will become, and the more aggravated and stimulated the reptilian brain becomes, the higher its rank in the decision-making process of the human being. To the point that if you are surrounded by reptilian cowards, hurting the most vulnerable people, feeding on the young, that they're in the role of pretending to serve, you will become a reptile to survive the pain and sociopathic algorithm that's running that show. So if you want to know how corrupt the power structure is, be it your parents, be it your teachers, be it your high facilitators, be it your Democrats, or be it your Republicans, or be it your FBI, look at the level of fear and look at the level of empathy. If you're acting out of fear, your brain is perceiving high degrees of sociopathic tendencies and the cult framework around you. So we're not dumb. It's just that reptilian behavior creates more reptilian behavior, creates more reptilian behavior. Now, there's only one reason that the high facilitators refused to publicly apologize and make this where this belongs to be their number one priority, and it was fear. In other words, the high facilitators feared their community and their cult. They were afraid of you, your judgments, your gossip, your lack of support. They were afraid that you wouldn't stand by them standing up for the truth when they found out. And because they were afraid of you, their reptilian brain led the show. And their reptilian brain said, you know, we've been silencing these things and marginalizing and suppressing these things for decades. And that's probably the safest way to go about this. We don't know if the public will accept what I believe that the high community would accept. Meaning I would have looked very favorably, and this is what I visioned happening. I thought, wouldn't it be wonderful to have the facilitators say, you know, one of our facilitators made a big mistake. We own it fully and completely. We are going to fully understand the mistake, and we're going to heal our ignorance. We're going to look at it. We're going to keep you informed. We're going to keep you safe. And we ask for your support. We ask that you be reminded we are not omnipotent. There are areas we don't know what we're doing. And your safety is our priority. In the meantime, please give support to the sexually abused client. That our mission dictate, we were formed, the whole reason we're here is to help our participants which means it's our number one priority to correct the wrong when we realize that our participant would be better off if they had not encountered the Human Awareness Institute, because we didn't know what we were doing. And we want to learn about this. We want to grow. You see, the shame and the fear of the reptilian brain cannot imagine that there would be empathy, expects to be pounced on for being weak in that situation. Yet I believe that 70% of the healthiest members of the high community would recognize that leadership, would recognize the transcendence that is involved with facing a life crisis and choosing to act out of empathy rather than the reptile. I believe in you. I believe you would do that for your teachers, for your facilitators. And I thought it would be amazing. The best thing that's ever happened to High. Because when you're in the place of blind sympathy or self-referential dogma, this is the room of love. We've decided it is. We call it the room of love. There it is. This is it. Whatever happens in here is love. How do we know that? Well, we're not going to define love. We're not going to, because it is the room of love and it's happening in this room. Well, what about all the sexual abuse survivors who were ashamed not to participate and show their vaginas in a level 3 or level 4 workshop, who hadn't had the chance to debrief the group about the horrors of incest and rape, who haven't begun to grasp their feelings? It's not love for them. They go along with it. Many, many abuse survivors have learned that it's safer to go along with the power figures because they are beaten and raged at and hated and punished for standing aside and being a minority that says, no, this isn't for me. There's no real choice there. There's terror. But that doesn't get unpacked. Just like attachment disorder, just like trauma, just like traumatic history, there is no safe emotional history, which means that proximity leads a percentage of every workshop into reenactment and into danger. But most people can tough that out for a weekend, put on a good mask, and lick their wounds at home and wonder what's wrong with them because this was the room of love. You see, when you're sympathetic, this is the most wonderful organization. You know, when I discovered High, this was the best group I'd ever seen. Wonderful. Now, there's a great power of that positivity and openness and energy. But there were plenty of reservations, body symptoms going on in my body that was not comfortable and were not safe in that space. I just did not know how to take care of them. When my back would give out and I'd become totally crooked, my mind would say, back support. Where in this environment aren't I being supported? I'd look around and I'd say, what do you mean not being supported? I can raise my finger and get a tissue. But will a single member of this community educate me about PTSD, trauma, sensitivity, attachment disorder, abandonment? Will any define love and abuse and acknowledge that in unconscious patterns you are not at choice? No. I didn't know what I didn't know, so I couldn't take care of the parts that weren't safe in a space that was safe for some part of me, but not for the other. And you cannot create a world where everyone wins in a protocol that ensures that part of you loses. We're not talking about integrity. In a schizophrenic environment, i.e. we're committed to a world where everyone wins, and we're committed to denying the choice of our participants to know who's sexually abusing who. You know, this protocol of secrecy runs deep in high leadership. You cannot create a world where the group wins if a part of everyone in the group is losing to be in the group because it is not honored and welcomed into the group. And you cannot heal that dis-ease, that trauma, when it is taboo to bring up the fact that far from unconditional love, this part of me and this part of me is not safe institutionally in this space. You see, it's one thing to be ignorant. I thought the facilitators didn't know about trauma because none of them have told me. And they were my teachers. Well, when a stranger in a cafe educated me about trauma and I grasped that they had induced PTSD, that's what the name was for 500% more pain, more grief, more exhaustion than I had ever experienced in my life. I asked all the facilitators to read the books so that they could educate you. And that's when Jason Weston told me that trauma was not a high issue. Only if you're ignorant. The more informed you become, the more you pinpoint trauma as the fulcrum, the single biggest pivot. If you have undiagnosed trauma in your relationship, you are in danger, whether the trauma is in you or in your partner. And the relationship is not viable until that becomes conscious and worked out. Now, if that's the case in two people, and 90% of Americans deal with undiagnosed, repressed, undealt with trauma, you've got a 90% probability field of sustained chronic failure without understanding why, because you don't understand the paradigm that is affecting your life more than your choices. You see, you're not at choice in areas of trauma. You're not at choice in areas of severe shame, which is an area of trauma. You're not at choice around addictions, be they sexual addictions, love addictions, pleasure addictions. And when you don't even have a cogent definition of what love is and what it is not. And I'll share, because it's important. Love for the child is I need. It's self-centered and narcissistic, appropriately so, as long as it's coming from a child. But when you're traumatized and you haven't dealt with it, you are fixated and captivated in parts of your body that are the undeveloped child, the regressed, traumatized, dissociated child. That part doesn't grow up, so you're always a child. So love for you is I need. I don't give a shit about you. I need this. If you meet my needs, I love you. If you don't, fuck you. That's not an adult love. Adolescent, I want you. You know, that's the old Italian, you know, the whole pursue, I've got to have you. Meaning I've got to enjoy your body, whether it ruins your life, whether it ruins your marriage. Again, I'm completely self-absorbed. People who are traumatized as an adolescent do not develop emotionally past the trauma in the parts of their psyche that are dissociated and regressed. It's that simple. So adult love is actually quite rare because we're a highly traumatized cult. But what does it mean to be loved by an adult? Well, first of all, it's the first love that goes outward. First, it fills the self. You put on the oxygen mask first. So You love your own inner child. You love your own inner adolescent. You heal your traumas. It is the most natural progression of life, once you have filled the inner self, to turn outward, because it's beautiful out there. It's more complex out there. It's interesting. If you are self-absorbed, it is because you are trapped in your traumas in regressed states. It is not fun to be self-absorbed relative to being curious and filled with interest and wonder and service. It's fun to be outward focused. Not out of fear, because you've got to collude with the abuser and all that to survive, but to feel that inner safety and support and then turn outward. So what does love actually look like? How do you know if an adult is loving you? Well, it's not some esoteric lust fantasy. That's your adolescent. I love enough to care. I love you, but I don't love enough to care about you. It's a weak love. Love is like a bud. It slowly opens into the fullness of adult love. And it's a progression. It starts with I love you enough to care. The very next thing is I care enough to take time. I care, don't invest any time. It's a weak care, right? It's a tiny bit of care. I'll give you 10 minutes a week. So you love me enough to care, you care enough to take 10 minutes a week. It's a very, very, very tiny bit of love, but you're going in the right direction. I take enough time to see. I cannot tell you the incredible amount of ignorance and blindness. If you will ask 100 US couples, regardless of what they say about their relationship, what they see and what they know about each other and what they don't know. Do you know your partner's love language? Do you know if they're on the sensitivity continuum? Do you know what a peak experience would look like for them? What would being totally and completely loved look like to you? So I love you enough to care. I care enough to take time. To take enough time to see. To see you enough to understand. Seeing is not understanding. I see that, but I don't understand. I get this is who you are. I just don't understand how that all fits together. That's not who I am. I don't get it. I don't understand. I see you enough that my sight becomes understanding. Now, I understand you, I just don't empathize. You're fit together this way, that way, but it seems like a dumb design. Why don't you do it this way and this way? I understand you. Do I understand you enough to empathize? Because if you really see the world through understanding, standing under someone and going through their entire life, in many cases you realize you would be exactly the same way if you had that physiology, that memory, those parents, these cues, and you started the memory in the womb. Because a lot goes on in the birthing process. The Unabomber lost all feeling in a 6-month isolation stay in the hospital. And the reason he wanted to blow up science was because he ceased to be a human being. He lost touch with his empathic brain. He became a great scientist, a great engineer, but he hated the hospital for robbing him of his humanity. And the only thing he could conclude was to destroy the kind of engineering that would destroy the humanity in children. Do you understand enough to empathize? See, this is the beginning of being an adult, and I'll talk about it, in another area. The point is, it is a weak position to be interested in growth, to be interested in love, to be interested in healthy, sustainable sexuality, to be interested in community, to be interested in evolution, and turn your eye away and negate the ability and willingness to respond to ensure that those who have been traumatized and sexually abused in your community have your full support. And it's very simple. How can I help? It's organic for the empathic brain. It's rational for the rational brain. It is anathema to the reptilian brain. Fight, flight, and freeze will never ask that question. And it is a question that I have been watching for from any member of high leadership, and not one facilitator in the entire dynamic that is literally threatening the entire credibility and future of the organization and has already compromised and undermined the mission. Not one member of leadership has ever come close to asking, how can I help? And ironically, the easiest thing, which I volunteered when nobody asked, was the public apology and the process of integrating all of this and all that. That's the one thing they will not give. Because a shame-based person in the reptilian brain doesn't accept who they are, is frightened of the world, is ignorant of the unknown, does not trust the group. Now that's fine and normal. I would expect it in 90% of Americans. But it is problematic to occupy a position of leadership about love while behaving like a reptile. And it is problematic for you to allow that behavior unchallenged and believe that you have anything to do with evolution in your community. And community is sacred for a mathematical reason. If you can achieve empathy with trust in a community, partnering and synergy open up as mathematical probabilities. What a group can do together in partnership and synergy is exponentially bigger than what fear-based, isolated individuals can do alone. If you believe in evolution, the trust and empathy of the group is sacred. But you don't trust a reptile. In other words, you don't do a spiritual bypass and shortcut and say, well, why don't you trust people who will sexually abuse participants under the influence of psychedelics, and then trust people who will lie about it, and then we move towards synergy? No. Your brains can't be fooled. If you play those mind games, you will shut down, but talk the line, and you will in effect be driven insane, dissociated from your own sensations and observations, which is one of the most, is one of the most incredible disservices that any leadership body can do, is to ask you to go crazy, to rewire the words of love and abuse and cruelty and stupidity and cowardice, to rewire those words so that for the rest of your life you have a faulty map and can embrace cruelty and harm to you and those you love in the name of love, because you let an out of integrity leader shape those words for you. This is a line. Embracing what's in this video has huge positive potential for you, everyone you care about, and the entire organization. Fear, shame, and dissociation, which would be normal, also has huge consequences for your life and the organization. Now, the time of helping me personally, this is now year 6. Now I'm still dealing with 70% more pain than I had ever experienced in my life before this occurred. But that's much lower than the 500% more pain that peaked, as all the facilitators excluded me from the initial meeting in response to my request to be held, to be heard. That's when pain went up 500%. That's when I developed PTSD. I've been working step by step to regain sanity, psychological competency. But there are other members of the community. I talked to one woman 10 years out. She doesn't even feel safe to talk about the abuse at High. There's a trauma therapist who can't do her trauma work because her childhood abuse dynamic was reenacted and she was an incest survivor. And it just touched too many buttons. She regressed to age 3 last time I spoke to her. And a 3-year-old can't cope with life, let alone help abused children in her trauma therapy work. There is nothing bigger. It does not matter if the name, the Human Awareness Institute, collapses, goes up in smoke. Those are symbols. There is nothing more important in this cult, in these goals of evolution, love, intimacy, healthy, sustainable relationships, than becoming trauma literate, than holding power accountable, than seeing that people who play a role are capable of doing so, and by directing empathy and support to those most in pain by the dysfunctions in the group protocol. And all you have to do to find those, you can find me easily, is ask 1 to 10. How hard? How much overwhelm? How much pain are you dealing with? Now, they may not tell you because we're a cult that shames people who need people. It's a great way to bury the disease. We hurt people and then we teach them because we don't want to address the abuse, that if they acknowledge that they're hurt, they'll just be hurt some more. So a lot of people will lie or just walk away and hide. But particularly if you're dealing with your empathic brain, you can see and observe who they are. You can extrapolate. And life comes back into your future of healthy, sustainable evolution and relationships when you direct energy to those most vulnerable. For example, Julian Assange has told more truths about cruelty and corruption of power about the US military than any other journalist in the last 10 years. One man. And so he's being tormented and tortured over the last 7 years by a bullying legal system. Well, one man has communicated more cruelty from the Human Awareness Institute leadership body, more hypocrisy than any other person, and I'm the only one that I know of being cut out of the email lists, who is persona non gratis at the facilitator body. Of course, it's a little embarrassing that we are the Human Awareness Institute and we don't want to be aware of our impact or take responsibility for it. But these are the fractal patterns that need medicine. So when I see that, I send money to Julian Assange's legal fund because I don't want to live in a cult where my government commits Abu Ghraib and conceals that treachery, the abuse of my tax dollars, extracted by force from me so that they look better. I want to know this stuff so that I can apologize when I meet an Iraqi. I want to know the shit that's done with my tax dollars because it affects the way people feel about me as I travel the world. And I can't take responsibility and validate their expression if I don't know what's going on. So many, many ways that you can participate, and just know that it's the adult that is capable of doing that. And most of us are still stuck, including myself, in various elements of child and adolescent regress trauma.